Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, with a presentation that looks at the impact of the Great Depression on Hitler's rise to power. 4 important things happened as a result of the Great Depression. Weimar again became very unpopular. Parliamentary government well and truly broke down. Elite groups came to the conclusion that only a strong authoritarian government could take care of their interests. And the Nazis, ignored by most Germans in the 1920s, were now listened to. In the Great Depression, Germans began to add up the misery that they had suffered over the years, and it seemed to them that enough was enough. If the first years of Weimar had been dominated by defeat and the Treaty of Shame, and 1923 had been dominated by hyperinflation and humiliation, the Great Depression was dominated by the effects of unemployment. Liberal democracy had failed the German people over and over again. It hadn't brought them a just peace. It hadn't prevented 1923 and the collapse of the old mark. And now it hadn't prevented complete economic collapse. They wanted a future. At the very least, they wanted hope. Look at what had happened in Germany in the Depression. 5 major banks crashed in 1931, and more than 20,000 businesses folded. Unemployment shot up to just over 6 million by 1932. And we must add those unregistered for work, as many as 3 million, because they were also without jobs, plus their wives, plus their children. So that well over 20 million people were affected in total. And we must also add those who, though employed, were working for reduced wages, or else on reduced hours, or both. And then there was the fear of the employed, that they might be the next to lose their job. And there are the young Germans, leaving school with no prospect of a job. The collective misery and the anger can only be imagined. Now, I will probably use some of this material again, as I intend to post a presentation on how Hitler was helped into power too. But there's no harm in that. We use similar material to answer different questions, but we direct the material differently. So, the coalition government at the time the Great Depression took its toll on Germany was led by the Social Democrat leader Hermann Müller, as the Social Democrats were by far the largest party in the Reichstag at the time. But when the other parties in the coalition called for unemployment benefits to be cut, the Social Democrats refused to have anything to do with it and resigned from the coalition government. Hindenburg made a leader of the Centre Party, Heinrich Brüning, Chancellor, and it was Brüning who led the government through most of the Depression, from March 1930 to May 1932. Brüning set out to reduce government debt. He raised taxes, reduced wages, and reduced unemployment benefit too. Brüning's policies succeeded only in upsetting everybody. Brüning decrees hardship was the slogan given his actions. The Hunger Chancellor was the nickname given him. After Brüning, Hindenburg appointed Franz von Papen as Chancellor, and then Kurt von Schleicher, though their time in power is best measured in days. Schleicher was the power behind the throne, a confidant of President Hindenburg and his son Otto Hindenburg, who was himself close to his father. Schleicher was from a noble family and was an officer in Hindenburg's regiment. Hindenburg was appointing chancellors despite what the Reichstag might have thought about them. Pappen's government was known as the Cabinet of Barons, as it didn't have a single member of the Reichstag in it. But Hindenburg was forced to sack them when they couldn't get any legislation passed, forcing him instead to issue decree after decree. This had actually started with Brüning. So much so that in 1932 Hindenburg issued 66 decrees, whilst the Reichstag passed only 5 laws. This is why this period is known as presidential government. As for the traditional elites, anti-Weimar and anti-democracy, they had never accepted Weimar and had always wanted a return to authoritarian government. They were happy with this situation, but despite all their intrigue, they were unable themselves to govern. They needed the Nazis and their votes in the Reichstag. Hindenburg, Papen, and most of the traditional elite, the civil service, the judiciary, the army, the big industrialists too, thought that the old guard would control Hitler. They were wrong, but that was still their thinking. Finally, in need of hope, and with liberal democracy having repeatedly failed them, the German people turned away from the Republic. They turned instead to the extremes, both left and right. They turned to the Communist Party, who blamed the Depression on capitalism, and whose vote doubled, and from a much higher base than the Nazis. But they turned in their greatest numbers to the Nazi Party, whose vote rocketed. The Nazis continued to heap the blame on the same old enemies. The November criminals who had stabbed the German army in the back, the authors of the Treaty of Versailles, and those same criminals who had accepted it, the Republic and democracy. Communists and the Jews were blamed too. And they called for the same solutions. Smash the treaty, a greater Germany, a Germany for all Germans, but only Germans. Lebensraum. But now they added something more pressing, something very real to millions of Germans: work and bread. The difference was that now they were being listened to. There is a clear correlation between the rise of unemployment and the rise in the Nazi vote. And so the Nazi vote indeed rocketed, from just 800,000 in the pre-Depression election of 1928 to just short of 14 million in the first of the 1932 elections, with the Great Depression at its height. This made them the biggest party in the Reichstag. So, clear links to the Nazis' rise to power and the Great Depression. There were other factors, but for me it's pretty clear. No Depression, no Hitler. I hope this presentation gives you plenty to think about. Lots more detail in my ebook, Hitler's Rise to Power, that you can get on Amazon if you're interested in doing that. But thank you so much for listening, and good luck with your studies, whatever stage you're at when you listen to this presentation. Cheers.